At her birthday dinner, my daughter-in-law raised her glass and smirked. "Soon we'll have everything she owns," she said. My son laughed beside her, his arm around the woman planning my erasure. I smiled through it, pretended not to hear. But that night, I rewrote my will and made sure they'd never touch a single thing I built. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The clink of crystal echoed like distant bells across the dimly lit dining room. Soft jazz filtered through ceiling speakers, nearly drowned out by the hum of laughter and the scrape of polished silver on porcelain. A modern chandelier floated above the long table, casting warm light over the curated crowd. The smell of seared duck and truffle oil mingled with expensive perfume. Evelyn Grant sat at the far end of the table, her posture impeccable, her navy blue wool coat draped carefully over the back of her chair. She'd chosen a simple slate gray blouse for the evening, quiet, unfussy, not desperate to impress. Tara would have called it utilitarian. Evelyn called it appropriate. Across from her, Tara Grant glowed. Literally. Her dress shimmered under the lighting, some metallic designer thing that looked more armor than fashion. She raised her champagne flute like a queen preparing to bless the room. Her hair, perfectly sculpted into beachy waves, didn't move as she stood. "I just want to say," Tara's voice lilted, controlled and too loud, "this year has been transformative for our business, our marriage." She rested a manicured hand on Ryan's shoulder. Evelyn's son nodded like a well-trained show dog. "And our future." Tara's gaze slid down the table, landing squarely on Evelyn. "Soon we'll have everything she owns." The guests laughed, some too drunk to catch the malice, others too polite to react. One woman sipped her wine awkwardly. Someone coughed. Evelyn's lips parted slightly, frozen mid-smile. She blinked once, slowly. The room swayed just a little, though her glass remained perfectly still in her hand. Ryan chuckled, low and unsure, like someone testing ice too thin to hold weight. "Okay, Tara," he said, nudging her elbow with a sheepish grin. But he didn't correct her. He didn't deny it. A tightness unfurled in Evelyn's stomach like a fist curling around her spine. She reached for her water, hands steady. She had learned long ago that rage was useless in public. It wrinkled the face and made the tongue sloppy. Instead, she smiled. The kind of smile that meant absolutely nothing and everything all at once. Tara sat down, basking in the glow of her own audacity. The flicker of candlelight made her gold earrings dance like flames. Evelyn turned her head slightly, catching her reflection in the mirrored panel behind the bar. Her face gave away nothing. No crack, no tremor. Just a pleasant older woman attending her daughter-in-law's birthday. She folded her napkin in half on her lap. The cutlery sparkled. "Evelyn," said one of Tara's friends from the middle of the table, "you must be so proud of them. Such a power couple." Evelyn tilted her head. "They certainly know how to make an impression." Tara laughed too loudly, clearly assuming it was a compliment. Ryan didn't meet his mother's eyes. Instead, he buttered a roll with the same intensity as someone diffusing a bomb. The waiter arrived with dessert, some elaborate plate of lemon mousse shaped like a swan. Evelyn hated lemon mousse. She excused herself to the restroom instead. Inside the sleek, marbled bathroom, Evelyn gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection under the harsh white light. Her lipstick had barely smudged. She looked dignified, sharp, not weak, not fragile. She could still hear Tara's voice, bouncing in her skull like a wasp trapped in glass. "Soon we'll have everything she owns." Evelyn took a breath, held it, and exhaled, slowly. She adjusted her necklace, ran a finger along her jawline, and straightened the collar of her blouse. Then she returned to the table with the same cool composure she'd worn when her husband's casket lowered into the ground. "Everything okay?" Ryan asked, half standing. "Lovely," Evelyn said. "The powder room has those little eucalyptus towels, very posh." Tara raised her glass again. "To family," she said. Evelyn picked up hers, clinking it gently with her daughter-in-law's. Her voice was light, measured. 2. Knowing exactly who you're sitting across from. She took a sip of water. The mousse remained untouched. And as the laughter resumed and the waitstaff dimmed the lights further for the final course, Evelyn's eyes locked on Tara's. The candle between them flickered hard once, then steadied. Rain ticked gently against the window pane as Evelyn pushed open the glass-paned door of Cross and Crumb, the warm scent of yeast and cinnamon greeting her like an old song. She paused just inside, breathing in. A wall of heat from the ovens wrapped around her, banishing the cold morning air still clinging to her coat. The bakery was quiet this early. Only 2 customers sat near the back, sipping coffee over half-eaten croissants. A rack of crusty sourdough loaves steamed behind the counter, and trays of glazed cardamom rolls cooled on the butcher block prep table. Linda Cross, flour smudged on her apron and a pencil tucked behind one ear, looked up from icing a sheet of lemon buns. "Don't tell me you woke up craving carbs," she said, raising one gray brow. Her voice was dry, but the affection was tucked in the corners. "I woke up craving clarity," Evelyn replied, unwinding her scarf. Linda wiped her hands on a towel and walked around the counter, eyes narrowing as she took in Evelyn's expression. "Sit. I'll get the good coffee." Evelyn settled onto a stool at the end of the counter, the one near the window with the view of wet sidewalks and nodding tulips. The same stool she'd sat on for 20 years, ever since her first retirement morning when Linda had handed her a sticky bun and said, "Now you have time to learn how to be a little bad." Linda returned with 2 mismatched mugs, hers chipped and orange, Evelyn's navy with a faint white swirl. "She set it at the table," Evelyn said softly, fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic. "With guests present, smiling like a debutante." Linda didn't ask who. She didn't need to. "What exactly?" Evelyn hesitated, then repeated it verbatim, her voice flat. "Soon we'll have everything she owns." There was a beat of silence. Then metal clanged hard against steel. Linda had slammed down the baking tray she'd been holding. "That woman's poison," she said, eyes blazing. "Ryan's not bright, but he used to have a backbone." "He laughed," Evelyn said. She didn't look at her friend. Not full out. Just that awful, embarrassed kind of laugh, as if she were talking about a new purse, not a person. Linda didn't speak. She was watching Evelyn closely now, her hands motionless, chest rising and falling in controlled rhythm. "I smiled," Evelyn added. "I just sat there and smiled like it was a toast I was proud to be the subject of." "You smiled," Linda said, voice low, "because standing up and flipping the table would have gotten you branded senile. Unhinged. It would have been the excuse they're probably hoping for." Evelyn looked down into her coffee. "I don't know when I started letting silence do the talking." "Oh, honey, silence is just the breath before a song." Linda leaned in now, elbows on the counter. "You want to smile? Smile while you cut her out. Smile while you stitch the safety net tight and shove a pillow under your own future. Smile like the goddamn Mona Lisa." That made Evelyn laugh, a sound that came from deeper than her throat. She hadn't laughed like that since Harold passed. Not honestly. "I knew you'd say something awful and beautiful," she said. Linda poured herself more coffee. "You're not weak, Evelyn. You're surgical, and that scares women like Tara more than screaming ever will." Evelyn looked out the window as a man jogged past, hood up, shoes splashing in puddles. Her reflection in the glass didn't look like a woman unraveling. She looked like someone calculating. "I saw a lawyer once, years ago, after Harold died. I didn't change much, but I know where the file is." Linda's head tilted slightly. "You thinking of dusting it off?" "I'm thinking it's time I write some new instructions." Quietly, while they're busy planning their little empire. The elevator in the old downtown office building creaked as it ascended, slow, mechanical, and indifferent to modern efficiency. Evelyn stood still, watching the numbers light up in dull amber. Her gloves were tucked neatly into her handbag. Her coat, a sensible charcoal wool with a faint herringbone pattern, fell just below her knees. When the doors slid open to the 4th floor, she was met with the faint smell of old books and stronger coffee. The law office of Martin Blake and Associates had no receptionist, just a small wooden sign on the door that read, "Please knock. We're listening." She knocked once, knuckles crisp on wood. Martin Blake opened it himself. "Evelyn," he said, brows lifting, voice warm with old familiarity. "Haven't seen you in, 7 years?" "8," she replied, stepping inside. "You helped after Harold passed." Martin had aged in the way lawyers often do. Sharper eyes, grayer temples, more stillness in the face. The office was tastefully cluttered, heavy bookshelves, framed degrees, a small brass clock ticking steadily beside a bowl of peppermints. "Sit, please." He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk, then poured her a glass of water from a pitcher that sweated gently in the warm office. Evelyn sat, reached into her bag, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This is my current will, dated 2016. Everything to Ryan." Martin took it, flipped through the pages slowly, murmuring, "Straightforward enough, but not binding, not forever." She watched him over the rim of her glasses. "I'd like to change that." He looked up. "You want to amend it?" "No." She took a breath, firm and calm. "I want to erase them both, entirely. I want their names gone." Martin leaned back slightly in his chair, expression unreadable. Then he gave a small, knowing smile. "Well, that can be undone tonight." He moved with quiet precision, unlocking a drawer, retrieving fresh forms, uncapping a fountain pen. His handwriting was steady and elegant, the kind you only saw in men who still signed things with intention. "May I ask what prompted this?" he said without looking up. "I overheard a toast," Evelyn said. "They were already planning my assets like party favors." Martin snorted softly. "So they finally got greedy out loud?" She didn't respond. He worked in silence for the next several minutes. The scratch of his pen was the only sound in the room. Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the gray Portland sky hung low and colorless. A city bus hissed as it turned the corner, splashing puddles onto the sidewalk. When he finally slid the new documents across the desk toward her, he said, "I've redrafted your will, created a contingent trust, and restructured your medical directive. They're no longer your heirs, not even conditionally. Unless you undo this, everything now transfers to a holding trust you control until final distribution." Evelyn picked up the pen. "Good. No rush," Martin said gently. "Take a moment if you need one." "I've taken years," she replied. The pen moved cleanly across the paper. One signature after another. No tremble, no hesitation. When she set it down, Martin tapped a paperweight on top of the stack and nodded once. "I'll have everything notarized today. You'll get a certified copy within the week. Would you like me to inform them?" She looked up at him slowly. "Let them find out the way they plan their future, loudly, publicly, and far too late." Martin smiled for real this time. "You're sharper than they ever gave you credit for." "I was never trying to impress them," she said. "Just protect what I built." He stood to walk her out, but she paused at the threshold of the door. Her hand hovered on the knob. The Multnomah County Records Office smelled like paper and toner and old resolve. Evelyn stepped inside, her heels clicking against the waxed tile floor. The lighting was sterile, the kind that bleached the color from skin and made even the living look filed and archived. Walls lined with faded notices and bulletin boards bore the silent weight of 100 paper-bound lives. She moved with purpose, clutching a slim folder under one arm. Her black gloves, damp with rain, peeked from the side pocket of her handbag. A fine mist clung to her coat, beating at the shoulders. Outside, Portland drizzled, steady, gray, and unapologetic. Behind the service window sat a woman with a high ponytail and square-rimmed glasses, tapping away at a keyboard. She looked up as Evelyn approached and blinked once, recognition softening her face. "Mrs. Grant?" Evelyn smiled. "Sophia, I wasn't sure you'd still be here." Sophia Kim stood, coming around the partition door with surprising warmth. She looked younger than Evelyn remembered, 38 maybe, though the under-eye circles spoke of long weeks and quiet burnout. "I was a volunteer back in high school. You used to grade my essays like they were doctoral theses." "They deserved to be," Evelyn said. You never confused speed with substance. Sophia laughed. That's still true. What can I do for you? Evelyn lowered her voice. I need to file a deed protection and confidentiality request. Sophia's smile faded into something more professional, more serious, but not cold. Of course. Let's take care of that in the back. You don't want to do this at the walk-up window? She led Evelyn through a side door into a small conference-style room with a rolling chair and 2 stiff-backed seats. A window looked out onto the rainy street. Evelyn could just see the reflection of her umbrella leaning against the building wall outside, bright red among a row of black. Sophia sat across from her, sliding over a set of clean forms. You want full disclosure suppression and ownership lock? Evelyn nodded, and an alert for any attempted transfers. Sophia pulled out a secure stamp and reached for her clipboard. We'll lock it through the clerk's restricted database. Not even your heirs will be able to request copies without your express written permission. It'll take effect within 24 hours. No heirs left to worry about, Evelyn said simply. Sophia glanced up, something flickering behind her eyes. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be. They removed themselves the moment they thought I'd never notice. Sophia didn't ask questions. She just slid the forms across the desk. Evelyn signed every line with the same elegant handwriting she once used to mark up lesson plans. Measured, sharp, unapologetic. Sophia stood and fed the forms through a high-speed scanner. A quiet, whirring sound filled the room. Then came the mechanical chunk of the confidential seal being pressed onto the top sheet. When she returned, she placed a stamped copy in a pale blue folder and handed it to Evelyn. You're protected now, she said, legally and personally. Evelyn accepted it with both hands. Her fingers didn't shake. Thank you, Sophia. You were always the kind of teacher who made girls like me believe we belonged in offices like this. I've never forgotten that. Evelyn smiled, not with politeness, but with something real. Then file this under full circle. She stepped back into the main lobby. The fluorescent lights seemed a little less harsh now. Maybe it was the folder in her hand, or maybe it was the absence of fear. Outside, the sidewalk glistened with puddles that caught the gray sky like broken mirrors. She didn't open her umbrella. The rain hit her cheeks in soft pinpricks, grounding her. With each step, something inside her loosened. Her house, her will, her name. They were hers again. Not inherited, not owed, not up for discussion. The driveway looked just as manicured as it had last Christmas, new mulch in the flower beds, a motion sensor porch light that flicked on the moment Evelyn's shoes hit the concrete. Tara liked optics. She'd paved their life in Pinterest aesthetics and mid-century lighting. Evelyn climbed the steps slowly, her gloved hands holding a bottle of wine, modestly priced, though the label suggested otherwise. She didn't ring the doorbell. Just knocked twice, sharp and deliberate. Tara opened the door in a silk blouse the color of pomegranate seeds. Her lipstick matched exactly, as if she'd coordinated with the wine Evelyn now offered up. Oh, Evelyn, she said, the smile stretched just a little too wide. You didn't need to bring anything. Evelyn returned the smile with a mirror's precision. Habit and etiquette. Tara stepped aside. Come in, come in. The house was warm and dimly lit, staged like a luxury listing. A candle burned on the entry table, white tea and bergamot. The dining table gleamed, already set for 3, the plates layered in a stack of porcelain and gold chargers like some suburban Versailles. Ryan walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. Hey, Mom. He kissed her cheek with a mechanical familiarity. Dinner's almost ready. Fillets on the grill. She looked at him a beat too long before answering. How traditional. They sat down 20 minutes later. Tara had arranged rosemary sprigs around the edge of the serving platter, as if the steaks were posing for a lifestyle magazine. Conversation was light at first. Vacations, weather, someone's neighbor's remodel. Then over a mouthful of Cabernet, Tara leaned in. We were just saying how nice it is that the house is still in the family. I mean, it just makes sense, you know. Evelyn cut into her steak, clean, deliberate movements. She chewed slowly, enjoying the bite. What does? That it'll all stay cohesive, Tara said, gesturing vaguely. The house, the accounts. It's just simpler when things are set up smart. Ryan, across from her, added, "It's good to know things are secure." Secure? Evelyn set her fork down on the edge of her plate, the metal clicking lightly against the porcelain. She dabbed at the corners of her mouth with a cloth napkin, folded it neatly, and laid it beside her wineglass. Then she looked at both of them. Really looked. Her voice, when it came, was clear and level. "Not for you, not anymore." Tara blinked. "I'm sorry? You shouldn't be." Evelyn reached for her water glass. "You should be careful." Ryan leaned forward. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Evelyn sipped, then set the glass down with surgical precision. "The house, the accounts, the medical directives, all of it. None of it involves you now." Tara laughed, too loud and too fast. "That's funny." Evelyn didn't blink. "It wasn't meant to be." The room seemed to stretch a little thinner. Ryan's brow furrowed. "You changed your will?" "I rewrote my future," Evelyn said. "Yours was written in smug little toasts at restaurants. Mine was signed in ink and filed under seal." Tara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Ryan stared at her like she'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. He wasn't blinking. His lips had parted slightly, but whatever instinct to respond hadn't made it to his vocal cords. Across the table, Tara's grip slipped. The wineglass in her hand tipped sideways, landing hard against the rim of her plate before rolling off. A splash of deep red arced across the linen tablecloth like a bloodstain, soaking into the embroidered edge with greedy speed. No one moved to clean it. Evelyn picked up her napkin, folded it again with deliberate care, and pressed it gently to the corner of her mouth. She didn't look at the mess. She didn't acknowledge the growing silence or the thin crack forming in Tara's performance. "I've taken care of it," she said softly, setting the napkin down beside her empty plate. The words didn't ring out. They settled, low and dense, like sediment in water, heavy and final. Tara's eyes darted toward Ryan, searching his face for a cue, a defense, a counterstrike. But Ryan still hadn't moved. His fork hovered an inch above his plate, and the steak he'd been sawing into had gone cold. The candlelight flickered off his glasses, masking his expression behind a shifting glare. "I'm sorry," Tara said at last, voice brittle. "Taken care of what exactly?" Evelyn turned to her slowly. "Everything." Tara's expression twisted. "You're being dramatic." "No," Evelyn said calmly. "You were, when you toasted to stealing what you hadn't yet earned." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. It carved the air between them, making it impossible to pretend anything could be sutured back together. "I think," Ryan started, then faltered. "You think I won't go through with it," Evelyn said. "You think I came here tonight just to make noise. But the ink is dry. The protections are filed. You're no longer entitled to what you mistook for inevitable." Tara straightened in her seat, a sudden flicker of fury replacing the slip of surprise. "You came here to gloat." "I came here to inform you, one time, with manners." Ryan finally spoke. "Mom, this isn't like you." Evelyn met his gaze for the first time that evening. "You're right. It's like the version of me you stopped noticing a decade ago." The clock in the hallway ticked once, loud and clear. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. A car passed by slowly, headlights washing the wall in moving gold. Nobody reached for dessert. Evelyn pushed her chair back with quiet control and rose. She placed her napkin on her plate, smoothed the front of her coat, and picked up her purse. "Well," she said, "thank you both for dinner." The steak was slightly overdone, but the rosemary was a nice touch. Tara stood too fast, knocking her chair into the buffet behind her. "You can't just change everything and walk away." Evelyn smiled. It was a tired smile, but there was steel beneath it. "I didn't just change everything. I ensured you never will." She turned toward the front door, her heels moving in soft, decisive clicks on the hardwood floor. The hallway seemed longer now, narrower somehow. But she didn't look back. Ryan followed her a few steps. "So what? You're cutting us out completely?" "No," she said without turning around. "You did that yourselves." The windshield wipers beat steadily, swiping away the night in metronomic rhythm. Evelyn's headlights carved thin, silver tunnels through the rain-slicked streets of Portland. The city, always wet this time of year, wore its gloom like a habit. Neon signs blurred into bleeding colors, open signs, bar lights, the flicker of walk signals no one obeyed. Her hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, no tension in her knuckles, no racing pulse. It was done. Her tires hummed along the wet pavement as she passed the familiar rows of bungalows and narrow trees, bowing under the weight of the drizzle. She didn't rush. There was nothing left to escape from. When she pulled into her driveway, the motion light over the garage flicked on, illuminating her house's white trim and the ivy creeping along the front post. It looked just as it had for 30 years, except now, finally, it felt like hers again. Evelyn stepped inside, turned the deadbolt behind her, and slid her shoes onto the tray by the door. She moved through the house like she'd done thousands of times before, automatic, practiced. But this time she paused before switching on the living room lamp. Silence, but not the hollow kind. The kind that follows a closing gavel or the last page of a hard book. She filled the kettle and set it on the stove. Mint tea. The bag floated in the cup like a small, patient flag. Steam curled upward as the rain tapped against the windows in irregular rhythm. She stood there, watching the drops race each other down the glass. Then her phone buzzed. Once, twice, then again. She picked it up. "Tara, you can't just do this. You think this will stand? You're not in your right mind." Another one came in before she could react. "Tara, Ryan is livid. You've humiliated us. We'll challenge it." Evelyn read them all with the stillness of a woman folding laundry. No spikes of adrenaline, no heat rising behind her ears. She swiped up and deleted the thread. The screen went blank again, save for the reflection of her face in the black glass. Calm, unbothered. Her tea was just cool enough now. She took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle deep in her chest. The phone buzzed once more, a different tone. She picked it up. "Linda." She answered on the first ring. "You look calm as a stone," Linda said before she could say hello. "I mean, I haven't seen you, but I can feel it through the phone." "I'm drinking tea," Evelyn said, and deleting threats disguised as indignation. Linda snorted. "They'll come harder now." "I expect them to," she replied, then took another sip. A pause. Then Linda asked gently, "How did it feel?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She watched a single drop of water slide down the side of the mug. "Righteous," she said finally. There was a smile in Linda's voice. "You always did have a gift for choosing the exact word." They didn't speak for a moment. No need. "You're not alone in this, Evie," Linda added. "Whatever storm's coming, don't think for a second you have to hold the umbrella by yourself." Evelyn's throat tightened just slightly. "I know." They hung up quietly, without fuss. Evelyn stood there for a few more minutes, letting the moment stretch. The house creaked once in its bones, a comforting sound. The sound of something old and solid that refused to collapse. She moved to the window and drew the curtain back just enough to glance outside. Evelyn sat at her breakfast table, swirling honey into her tea when the phone rang. The name on the screen made her smile without showing teeth. "Martin Blake." She answered on the second ring. "Good morning." Martin didn't bother with pleasantries. "He came in this morning." "Ryan." Evelyn took a sip, unhurried. "Ah. Demanded to see your estate documents, claimed power of attorney. I told him he had neither access nor authority." "Did he bring Tara with him?" she asked mildly. Number but her scent lingered, something floral and entitled. Evelyn chuckled softly, setting her cup down. "And how did he take the refusal?" Martin paused. "Like a man realizing the elevator only goes down from here." "Thank you," she said simply. "Do you want me to document his visit?" "No," Evelyn said. "Let him stew in silence. Noise is his currency. Let's bankrupt that too." Martin laughed. "You're colder than I remember." "Not cold," she said. "Correct." After they hung up, Evelyn pulled on her coat, fastened the top button, and stepped out into a soft drizzle. She didn't bother with an umbrella. The walk to Cross and Crumb wasn't long, and she liked the weight of the rain on her shoulders today. It felt earned. Inside, the bakery was alive with chatter and warmth. Cinnamon rolls lined the case. their frosting still glossy. Linda stood behind the counter, arguing good-naturedly with a customer over the merits of walnut scones. When she spotted Evelyn, she handed the bag over with a wink and waved her friend to their usual stool. "Tell me you came for gossip and not grief," Linda said, sliding her a mug already filled with dark roast and a splash of oat milk. "I came for both," Evelyn said, "but mostly to tell you Ryan tried to breach the gates this morning." "Oh?" Linda leaned forward. "And was he turned away with the velvet rope or escorted out entirely?" "He demanded access. Martin refused. He left empty-handed and presumably full of fury." Linda barked a laugh, banging the mug lightly against the counter. "God, I wish I could have seen his face." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You will. I imagine it's going to be the new default." They drank in silence for a moment, the comforting kind that wraps around two people who've seen each other through decades of better and worse. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said at last, eyes fixed on the swirl of coffee in her cup. "Oh no," Linda muttered playfully. "That always ends in someone crying or someone getting cut out of a trust." "Not this time. I want to leave a letter." Linda stilled. "A letter?" "To attach to my will, not legal. Just personal. Something they can open after I'm gone. No lawyer's voice, just mine." Linda looked at her for a long moment. "That's not about them, is it?" "No," Evelyn said. "It's about me. Making sure the last word sounds like me, not court phrasing or notary stamps." Linda nodded once. "Do it, but make it sharp, not sentimental. They don't get that part of you." "I don't plan to write it with tears," Evelyn replied. "Just ink and clarity." Later that afternoon, back in the quiet of her study, Evelyn retrieved her stationery from the drawer, thick ivory paper, crisp and uncreased. The pen she chose had belonged to Harold, still smooth as glass in her fingers. She didn't start the letter with "Dear." There was nothing dear about this. Her handwriting flowed, even and resolute. No tremors, no second thoughts, no forgiveness offered. She didn't threaten, she didn't scold, she simply told the truth about what she saw, about what she wouldn't allow, and what it took to live in peace again. When she finished, she folded the paper, sealed the envelope with wax, and pressed her signet into it, an old habit from her teaching days. Then she slipped it into a folder labeled "Final Instructions" and placed it in the fireproof safe behind the linen closet door. The rain had thickened by the time Evelyn reached Martin Blake's office. It came down in hard, diagonal lashes, as if the sky had grown impatient. She shook out her umbrella on the stoop and stepped inside, her boots leaving faint wet outlines on the slate floor of the lobby. Martin looked up as she entered, a pen frozen mid-signature. "You walked in this?" he asked, rising from his chair. "Felt appropriate," Evelyn replied, pulling a small envelope from her coat pocket. "Symbolic, even." He took the envelope and ran his thumb over the wax seal. "The letter?" She nodded. "Keep it with the will. They'll get it after I don't need to hear their reactions." Martin smiled faintly and placed it in a file folder marked in his own careful script. Poised as ever. Evelyn was about to respond when his assistant stepped in, holding a manila envelope with no return address. "This came for Mrs. Grant," she said hesitantly. "No postage. Someone dropped it at the front desk, said it was urgent." Martin took the envelope, examined it, and handed it to Evelyn. It was light, unsealed, her name typed across the front, nothing else. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a printout, a still frame, clearly from a phone camera. It showed Evelyn through the bakery window 2 days ago. She was laughing with Linda, coffee in hand. Blurry, harmless, but wrong. It felt like surveillance. Underneath the photo, printed in plain black font, were 3 words. "This isn't over." Martin's expression darkened. "That's harassment." "It's a threat that hides behind vagueness," Evelyn said quietly, folding the paper. "Intentional. Calculated." He looked at her. "File a report, today." "I intend to." She did, quietly, efficiently, without drama. A detective took the photo, jotted notes, and nodded with a kind of tired sympathy that said, "I've seen uglier, but this still matters." They couldn't trace the envelope, but Evelyn didn't need proof. She knew the shape of Tara's games, the venom that always arrived just disguised enough to be deniable. By the time she left the station, the rain had gone sideways. Wind howled down the street corridors, lifting leaves and scraps of paper into miniature tornadoes. Evelyn's umbrella snapped backward halfway through the walk home. She didn't try to fix it. She simply folded it, tucked it under her arm, and kept walking. Wet hair clung to her face. Her coat grew heavier with each block, but she didn't feel defeated. She felt strong, oddly strong. Rain slapped against her cheeks like applause. The cold grounded her, reminded her she was still here and still sharp. By the time she reached her porch, her hands were numb, but her mind was clear. Linda arrived just after sunset. She didn't knock, just came in the back door, holding a bag of pastries and a fresh pair of socks. "I heard," she said simply, dropping the wet bag by the door. "I filed," Evelyn replied, handing her a towel. "Let them know I'm watching now, too." Linda poured them both whiskey from the small decanter Evelyn kept for long winters and hard conversations. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the storm batter the gutters. The heat from the fireplace crackled softly. Then Evelyn's phone buzzed. She picked it up and frowned. "Martin," she said, already standing. Linda narrowed her eyes. "What now?" Evelyn put the call on speaker. Martin's voice was low and measured, but there was a new edge to it. "Ryan's filed a petition with the probate court." Linda stiffened. "On what grounds?" Martin exhaled slowly. "He's claiming Evelyn is no longer mentally fit to manage her estate. He's challenging everything. Claims undue influence, diminished capacity, and potential elder abuse. Against me, against Linda, maybe even against the county clerk." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the rain pelting the windows and the low hum of the refrigerator. Evelyn's face didn't change. She walked to the fireplace, threw the snapped umbrella onto the hearth, and watched it hiss in the flame. The evaluation room was quiet, almost too quiet for Evelyn's liking. It had the overthought warmth of modern clinical spaces, soft beige walls, an artificial plant by the window, and a low gurgling sound from a desktop water fountain that seemed more performative than therapeutic. Still, Evelyn sat comfortably, her back straight and her expression open, though not eager. She wore a gray wool coat over a dark green turtleneck and had taken the time to polish her boots that morning. If they were going to question her mind, she wasn't about to give them any reason to question her dignity. Across from her sat Dr. Miriam Lassiter, a licensed neuropsychologist with steel gray hair, black-rimmed glasses, and a voice like polished river stones, soft, but shaped by pressure. She held a clipboard in one hand and a capped pen in the other, her legs crossed neatly at the ankle. She greeted Evelyn warmly but without condescension, which Evelyn took as a hopeful sign. "We'll take our time," Dr. Lassiter said. "It's not a pass-fail test, just a conversation designed to measure a few things: orientation, memory, abstract reasoning, judgment. I'll ask questions, you'll answer however you like. Is that all right with you?" Evelyn gave a short nod. "You ask, I'll answer." And so it began. Dr. Lassiter started with the basics: Evelyn's name, the date, the current president, and where she was at that moment. Evelyn answered each one with a measured tone, eyes steady, voice unshaken. When asked to subtract serial sevens from 100, she did so slowly but with confidence, writing the numbers down herself in neat, slanted handwriting. Her memory tasks were flawless. She repeated back lists of words after a pause, recalled details from a short passage with precision, and described what she'd had for breakfast a week ago Thursday, right down to the overripe banana. There were word association puzzles, emotional hypothetical scenarios, and a segment that asked her to interpret the meaning behind abstract images. Evelyn leaned into those. It reminded her of grading essays, how much a person could reveal in the margins. She spoke deliberately, but never hesitated. If the doctor was hoping to trip her up, she would find no loose threads here. They were nearly an hour in when Dr. Lassiter finally set the clipboard down on the table between them. She removed her glasses, folded them slowly, and looked at Evelyn not as a patient, but as a peer. "You're sharper than most people 10 years younger than you," she said. "Your recall is clean, Your reasoning is linear, and your language skills are exceptional." Evelyn lifted one eyebrow. "Should I have tried to seem a little more confused? Just for variety?" Dr. Lassiter chuckled. "I think your son may be the one struggling with cognitive dissonance." The appointment ended with polite nods and the clicking of coat buttons. Evelyn thanked her, stepped out into the crisp afternoon, and didn't stop walking until she reached Martin Blake's office 2 blocks away. By the time she arrived, Martin had already received the full report via secure email. He met her at the door, waving the papers in one hand like a victory flag. "She called you intellectually robust," he said, ushering her inside. Her exact words. "I didn't even know psychologists use terms like that outside of academic journals." "She probably just enjoyed a civil conversation," Evelyn replied. "They're going extinct." Martin wasted no time. He filed the evaluation along with a formal request for dismissal of Ryan's petition. 48 hours later, the court issued its decision, concise and uncompromising. The claim was struck down in its entirety. No further inquiry would be entertained. Evelyn Grant was, according to the official record, perfectly capable of managing her affairs. When she read the ruling, Evelyn didn't smile right away. Instead, she closed the document slowly, placed it in a leather file, and pressed her hand gently over the top of it for a long moment. She wasn't celebrating a win. She was acknowledging a truth that had been dismissed too easily by people who should have known better. Later that afternoon, she and Martin walked out of the courthouse together. It had rained earlier, and the sidewalks still glistened underfoot, leaves pressed flat like bookmarks no one had picked up. A breeze swept down from the north, lifting Evelyn's coat just slightly as she stepped out onto the curb. It was there, just across the street, that she noticed the black sedan again. Parked, idle, headlights off. She didn't flinch this time. She didn't break stride. She simply glanced at it once, then turned toward home. The drizzle came and went in long, curtain-like waves, never quite enough to cancel plans, but just persistent enough to dampen sleeves and bring out the scent of wet earth. Evelyn stood at the edge of her garden, a small trowel in one hand, her other tucked into the pocket of her rain jacket. The hydrangeas near the stone border had browned earlier than expected, and she was gently snipping the worst of the dead heads, letting them drop into the compost bucket beside her boots. A few birds chirped from the dogwood tree in the corner, unfazed by the mist. The world was quieter when it rained. Evelyn had always loved that, the way the air hushed itself, as if making space for thoughts to rise to the surface. She moved to the lavender next, checking the roots for signs of rot, when something shifted in her periphery. Just beyond the low iron gate at the edge of her property, across the narrow residential street, sat a gray sedan. Parked, engine off, windows up. She didn't need to walk closer to see the outline in the driver's seat. Ryan. Not approaching, not leaving, just watching. Evelyn didn't wave. She didn't acknowledge him at all. Instead, she turned her back and returned to the soil. She would not give him the performance he was waiting for. Not a scowl, not a plea, not even recognition. By dusk, the car was gone. Linda arrived not long after, carrying a small overnight bag in one hand and a pie dish cradled in the other. "I made cherry because I knew Apple would feel too nostalgic," she said as she stepped inside, brushing raindrops from her hair. "Also, I figured I should be here tonight, just in case the vultures decide to circle a little lower." Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "You think he's foolish enough to show up?" Linda shrugged. "I think desperation always tips into foolish, and Tara doesn't believe in consequences that apply to her." They shared the pie after a modest dinner, mugs of soup, warm bread, butter softening on the counter, and then settled into the living room. Evelyn had lit the fireplace even though the chill wasn't sharp enough to require it. It was more for the sound, the glow, something solid and ancient in the center of her carefully built life. After Linda went upstairs to the guest room, Evelyn moved through the house slowly, checking the doors, flipping light switches off one by one. She paused at the hallway closet, opening it to reveal the recessed wall safe tucked behind the folded quilts. She entered the code with steady fingers. Inside, everything waited exactly as she had left it: the sealed will, the notarized trust documents, the medical directive, and the letter, wax-sealed and weighty with truth. She ran a hand along the folder's edge, then added a second copy of the court's ruling into a labeled pocket. She would not be caught unprepared. Not again. She closed the safe, spun the dial, and stepped back. The click of the lock settling into place was oddly satisfying. Rain struck harder against the windows now, the wind rising with enough force to rattle the old frame in the kitchen. Evelyn stood in the dark for a moment, letting the storm sing without interruption. She climbed into bed around 11, her robe wrapped tightly around her as she tucked the blankets over her legs. Her bedside lamp cast a pale cone of light onto the quilt, catching the edges of a half-read novel resting face down beside her. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She reached over and flipped it face up. Unknown number. You're embarrassing yourself. Walk it back, before it gets worse. No one believes you're thinking straight. Evelyn stared at the messages for a long moment before deleting them without reading further. The quiet that followed was more satisfying than any argument. The sound woke her, not sharply but like something wrong beneath a dream, glass cracking, then the soft rustle of movement in the dark. It was just past 3 a.m. Evelyn sat up slowly, listening. The house was otherwise still, the wind from the earlier storm reduced to a low moan along the eaves. Downstairs, a cold draft crept beneath her bedroom door. She moved with precision, wrapping her robe tightly around her and slipping her phone into the pocket. She padded down the stairs barefoot, not out of bravery but instinct. The living room was cloaked in shadow, the fireplace now only ash and faint ember. She didn't have to reach the front window to know it had been shattered. Rain had crept in through the jagged opening, dampening the floorboards beneath the sill. Shards of glass glittered like ice in the dim light from the street lamp outside. A small, heavy rock, fist-sized, rested on the carpet near the bookshelf. There was no note attached. The message didn't need one. By the time the police arrived, the damage had stopped being theoretical. The responding officer was a younger man, polite but guarded in that way law enforcement can be when they're not sure whether they're stepping into a domestic dispute, a burglary, or something altogether messier. He took notes in a small black field book as Evelyn recounted what little she knew. No other sign of forced entry, he said, kneeling to examine the lock. No items missing? None, she replied, voice calm. This wasn't theft, it was punctuation. Linda, barefoot and wrapped in a flannel robe, stood near the kitchen with her arms folded. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, but her face was sharp with anger. They wanted to rattle you, she said, watching the officer bag the rock for evidence. This is their tantrum. Evelyn moved to the counter, started the kettle, and reached into the cabinet for the chamomile. It wasn't a performance. She truly needed the tea. Let them show their true selves, she said softly without looking up. It's easier when people choose their masks openly. The officer asked if she wanted to file a restraining order. She said yes. Not because she believed Ryan or Tara would return to the scene personally, but because she knew their kind preferred to operate in the shadows, pushing others to get their hands dirty. He handed her a copy of the initial report, along with a case number scribbled in the corner. As he stepped outside to make his call, Linda turned to Evelyn, her face still flushed with fury. They crossed the line, she said. You can't pretend this is just family drama anymore. They brought this into your home. I know. You're too calm. I'm exactly calm enough, Evelyn said, pouring the hot water over the tea bag and watching the bloom of color in the cup. If I give them fear, they'll turn it into leverage. If I give them anger, they'll call me unstable. So I give them nothing. Linda exhaled and leaned her hip against the counter. You're steel, Evie. I just wish you didn't have to be. Later that morning, Evelyn sat across from Martin in his office once again. The file between them was thicker now. Security enhancements, estate protection audits. He'd gone over every loophole twice and was already drafting language that would make it nearly impossible for anyone to contest even the smallest clause without triggering heavy legal penalties. I can build walls around the assets, Evelyn, he said, but I can't insulate you from people who are determined to self-destruct and take you with them. I don't need insulation, she replied. I need paper trails, timestamps, and good counsel. You have all three. She left the office shortly before noon. The air outside had dried, but clouds still hovered. low, gray, and restless. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, her phone vibrated once in her coat pocket. Unknown number. Funny what glass reveals once it's broken. Let's see what you hide behind yours. She read it twice. Then she slid the phone back into her pocket and walked on without a word. The courtroom was half empty, its pale wooden benches lined with the weary and the curious. Evelyn entered without announcement, her coat damp at the cuffs from the mist outside. She took a seat in the last row, her movements quiet but unhurried. No one turned to look at her. They rarely did when you entered without noise, without perfume or panic. Her presence folded into the room like breath into cold air, visible only for a moment before disappearing again. Up front, Ryan sat stiffly in the petitioner's chair, his suit a size too tight around the shoulders. His tie was skewed just slightly, and his eyes looked hollow, the way people look after too many sleepless nights pretending the math might eventually forgive them. Tara sat beside him, arms folded tightly across her ribcage, lips pressed into a scowl so sharp it could cut paper. She wore black, as if the occasion called for mourning. The judge, a woman in her late 60s with cropped white hair and the kind of gaze that could silence a room without raising her voice, adjusted her glasses and looked down at the documents before her. "Mr. Grant," she said, "please proceed with your sworn statement regarding your financial position." Ryan cleared his throat. His voice, when it came, was cracked at the edges. "We have debts," he began. "Medical, credit cards, second mortgage, a business loan that defaulted after a partnership fell through." He hesitated, then glanced at Tara. She didn't meet his eyes. "And your income?" the judge asked, flipping through the pages. "I was laid off. Tara's business, her design firm. It's no longer solvent. We've applied for relief, but our assets, they're not liquid. The home's in both our names and—" Tara cut in sharply, her voice low but urgent. "We wouldn't be here if things hadn't shifted. We had a plan. Certain inheritances were expected. They were changed, suddenly and unfairly." The judge looked up slowly. "Let me be clear," she said. "This is a bankruptcy proceeding. I don't adjudicate hurt feelings. I adjudicate numbers." Tara opened her mouth again, but Ryan reached out, barely brushing her wrist with his fingers, a quiet signal to stop. Evelyn watched all of this without expression. She didn't lean forward, didn't take notes, just watched, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her only movement was the occasional turn of her head as she glanced toward Linda, who had entered a few minutes after her, and now sat 2 rows ahead. When their eyes met briefly, Linda offered a barely there smile. Then she leaned back and whispered without turning her head, "Their empire is ash." Evelyn didn't smile. She didn't need to. The hearing wore on, statements, exhibits, numbers read aloud like eulogies. Evelyn listened as the once carefully constructed image of her son's life unraveled in columns and rows. They owed more than most people earned in a decade. Their assets were largely borrowed, and their collateral had collapsed under the weight of lifestyle inflation and terrible bets. It wasn't a downfall, it was a slow rot finally reaching the surface. The judge listened patiently, occasionally making notes, never once glancing toward the gallery. And then, near the end, her voice broke the room's rhythm. "Given the evidence presented," she said, "and the fact that your remaining income cannot sustain even a fraction of your debt service, I'm ruling for asset liquidation under Chapter 7. This includes the sale of your primary residence." Tara sat bolt upright. "That's our home." "It's collateral," the judge replied. "And it's underwater. The lien holder has already issued a pre-foreclosure notice. I suggest you start packing. The court will assign a trustee within 72 hours. Ryan said nothing. Tara turned toward him sharply, her voice a hoarse whisper. "This is her. She's behind this. She wanted this." Evelyn blinked slowly. She could feel Tara's eyes scanning the crowd, searching for a confirmation. She never turned her head. The judge rapped her gavel once. "Proceedings are adjourned." People began to rise. Papers shuffled, bags zipped. Evelyn waited until nearly everyone had filed out. Then she stood. No one noticed her leave. Outside, the sky had cleared. The clouds broke just enough for late sun to cast the courthouse steps in gold. Linda fell into step beside her. "You didn't say a word." "I didn't need to." Evelyn replied, pulling on her gloves. The truth did the speaking. Evelyn parked 2 houses down, beneath the shade of a trembling elm whose leaves had begun to dry and curl at the tips. She left the engine running for warmth, but lowered the windows enough to let in the clean October air. It smelled like turning seasons, crisp bark, wet concrete, the last push of summer grass clinging to relevance. In front of her, Ryan and Tara's house, the one they'd remodeled with contractor arrogance and Pinterest overreach, stood hollowed out, windows open to the breeze, its perfect symmetry broken by the chaos spilling onto the curb. Movers in navy uniforms lifted furniture piece by piece from the front door to the waiting truck. A white leather sofa, a reclaimed wood coffee table, Tara's faux French vanity with brass trim. Items that once held pretension now looked strangely orphaned under the daylight. Tara stood near the porch steps, hair pulled back in a fury bun, arms flailing as she barked at one of the workers about the fragility of those glass shelves. The man didn't argue. He just nodded, set the box down a little softer, and moved on to the next task. Ryan leaned against the side of the garage, arms crossed, jaw tight, face pulled into something between disbelief and resignation. He didn't speak. He barely moved. He looked for the first time like someone who understood that loss doesn't always arrive with a bang, but with a receipt. Evelyn watched in silence. No triumph bloomed in her chest, no smugness, only stillness. The kind of peace that came not from winning, but from refusing to be manipulated one more inch. The door they had assumed would open for them forever had finally shut. Not slammed, not locked, just closed, with a quiet that couldn't be undone. A knock at her car window startled her only slightly. She turned to see Linda grinning through the glass, a paper bag balanced in one arm and a disposable coffee tray in the other. "Your surveillance shift over?" Linda asked as she slipped into the passenger seat. "I wasn't surveilling," Evelyn said, accepting the pastry bag. "I was witnessing." Tomato, Linda murmured, tearing open the top of a blueberry scone. "They're not handling it well." Evelyn glanced back toward the house. Tara was shouting again, this time into her phone, pacing the sidewalk with all the grace of a woman whose throne had been seized. Ryan remained in place, eyes hollow, still leaning, as if gravity had changed for him and he hadn't decided yet whether to resist it. "No," Evelyn said after a moment. "They aren't." Linda reached for one of the coffees, handed it to her, and sipped her own. "Martin called me earlier. Said your estate protections are now sealed tighter than Fort Knox. He was downright giddy about some clause involving conditional audits and inheritance lock protocols." Evelyn took a long, slow drink. "He's good at what he does." Linda smirked. "So are you." They stayed a while longer, sipping, watching. The last piece of furniture, a mirrored console Evelyn had always found gaudy, was loaded into the truck. A mover pulled the folding gate down and latched it. Tara shouted something unintelligible from the lawn, but the man didn't even flinch. He just climbed into the cab and started the engine. As the truck pulled away, Evelyn rolled up her window. "Let's go home," she said. Her house was warmer than it had been all week. The chill had broken sometime that afternoon, and now the air carried only the softness of early dusk. Evelyn lit the fireplace as Linda set out the remaining pastries on a ceramic plate, humming a melody Evelyn couldn't place but recognized by feel. The room filled with the scent of sugar and spice and faint wood smoke. Evelyn settled into her armchair, folded her legs beneath her, and opened the book she'd left unread for too long. Across the room, her phone buzzed once on the mantel. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she looked into the flames, watching them flicker and twist, their shapes always changing, never needing to be understood to be respected. Peace wasn't a dramatic thing. It didn't burst in with trumpets. It sat with you quietly, offering you your name back. She turned a page. The bell above the library door chimed softly as Evelyn stepped inside, shaking off her umbrella just enough to spare the polished tile floor. The scent of old pages, lemon oil, and distant rain welcomed her like an old friend. Warmth spread from the radiators along the walls, and through the windows, the Portland sky loomed soft and gray, filtering light like gauze across the glass. She paused just inside the entryway, letting her eyes adjust from the drizzle outside. Colorful banners hung from the rafters. Reading builds strong minds, and hand-drawn posters lined the walls with scribbled dragons, castles, and more than a few astronauts with speech bubbles that said things like, "Books are rocket fuel." The fundraiser was already underway in the children's wing. A semicircle of chairs surrounded a small stage where a local librarian, early 30s, friendly eyes, and animated voice, sat cross-legged on a giant cushion, reading aloud from a book Evelyn had donated 2 months ago. The book had a foil-stamped cover and thick pages that made the children gasp at every turn. There must have been 15 of them, clustered like ducklings on the carpet, their eyes wide, faces upturned, completely captivated. Evelyn stood at the back and watched. A small hand tugged at her coat hem. A girl, maybe 7, grinned up at her, 2 teeth missing. "You're the lady who got the books?" Evelyn smiled gently. "I helped, yes." "They smell new," the girl whispered like a secret. "I like that." "Me too." The girl gave her a tiny thumbs up, then skipped back to her place in the front row. Linda appeared at her side not long after, wearing a deep green scarf and holding 2 paper cups of cider. She handed one over wordlessly. "You're crying," she murmured. Evelyn dabbed at her cheek with the edge of her glove. "No, the heating vent is just enthusiastic." Linda bumped her shoulder lightly. "They didn't steal this. They never could." A librarian tapped a microphone. The room quieted. "Everyone, if I could have your attention for just a moment. Today we're honored to recognize a woman whose generosity has not only rebuilt our children's reading room, but ensured the purchase of over 500 new titles, classics, graphic novels, STEM texts, and multilingual stories for every age." Applause. Evelyn stiffened a little at first, as if her body didn't quite know what to do with being seen without suspicion. But then she met the eyes of the speaker, an older woman with silver curls and a calm, open face. There was no ceremony in her voice, just gratitude. "We all know Mrs. Evelyn Grant as a former educator," the woman continued, "but today we celebrate her as something even greater, a guardian of curiosity." The applause rose again, fuller now. Children turned in their seats to look at her. No judgment, just awe that someone could make books appear from thin air. Linda clapped loudest. Evelyn didn't speak. She only nodded, one hand on her chest, the other wrapped around the warm cup. It was enough. Later, when the room had thinned and the cider was nearly gone, Evelyn wandered the shelves quietly, trailing her fingers along the spines. She paused at one, Charlotte's Web, opened it, and smiled faintly when she found the inscription, "For the ones who think differently. Stay that way." E.g. Outside, dusk had slipped in unnoticed, bringing back the light rain. She didn't mind it anymore. Rain in Portland was a presence, not a problem. She stepped out beneath the awning, tugging her coat tighter and let the drops fall on her shoulders without hurry. She walked the long way home, past the quiet bookstore with the neon cat in the window, past the tea shop where Harold used to buy her cardamom biscuits, past the bike rack near the co-op where Linda once taught her to fix a flat tire. Her house glowed faintly in the distance, a silhouette of warmth and hard-won peace. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it. Instead, she looked up into the rain, the way she used to do as a girl. Back then, she believed the sky was trying to tell her something. Now she knew better. Sometimes the sky just watched, and sometimes that was enough. She stepped through her front door, placed her coat on the hook, and stood a moment before the mirror in the hallway. She looked like herself again. Older, yes, but not diminished, just sharpened by weather. And as she crossed into the living room, the fire still glowing low in the hearth, she heard the words again, not from Tara's lips this time, but from her own memory. That toast, that smug, smiling line. "Soon we'll have everything she owns." Evelyn poured herself a small glass of sherry, walked to the window and raised it slowly to her reflection. "They toasted to owning me," she whispered, the glass catching the firelight like a flame. "But I raised my glass higher and drank to their downfall.